Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. I'll keep the poll up on the screen here for another minute or so while I do a quick introduction. So my name is John Zornick, and I am the president of Alliance Careers. Some of you know me already, some of you don't, but we are a company that provides transition services, job placement services to veterans leaving the military. And let me just start today off by saying that you know what? I'm a big nerd. I'm a book nerd. I read a lot of books every year. And it's almost a year ago to this day. I checked my Goodreads account to verify this. Actually, a year ago tomorrow, that I read this fantastic book called Indianapolis: The True Story of the Worst Sea Disaster in U.S. Naval History and the 50-Year Fight to Exonerate an Innocent Man. Now, I'm an career Army, airborne, infantry type person. When I pick up military books, they're usually not Navy books, but I've got to say this one blew me away, really did. And the thing is, our guest today, Captain Bill Toti, figured very prominently into that book. I was just really incredibly impressed by the fact that he was a career naval officer who had the moral courage to, in a way, fight the big Navy and get them to admit that they made a mistake back in World War II by court-martialing the skipper of the Indianapolis after it had been sunk by a Japanese submarine. And let me tell you something. If you're in the Navy or any military service and you've got the goal of becoming a flag officer, the wrong way to go about that is to take actions that could greatly embarrass your service. But yet that didn't deter Bill Toti. So a few months ago, when I heard that he wrote a book that seemed to line right up with our mission here at Alliance, and you can see it here on the screen, From CO to CEO, a practical guide for transitioning from military to industry leadership. Well, I had to reach out to him, try to set up a meeting, which he was gracious enough not just to take the meeting with me, but to offer to participate in this webinar. Now, a little bit more about him. I learned when I first talked to him that he and I grew up in the same neck of the woods in the Youngstown, Ohio area, big middle class steel country. In fact, in our day, my day at least, our high schools were in the same conference. He enlisted in the Navy, then went off to the Naval Academy, had a stellar career as a submarine officer. Those of you not familiar with that, in a very elite part of the Navy. And again, he had a great career that culminated in him, not fully culminating, but one of the great tours that he had was to, in fact, command the USS Indianapolis submarine. And it was right around this time that his story intersects with that book. With the huge success of the book, he was highlighted not just in that book, but other books, documentaries, 60 Minutes. Later took on an assignment with the Pentagon, and that happened. He was there when 9/11 happened, when the plane crashed in the Pentagon. The thing is, he was right there. He was a first responder and helped save lives on that fateful day. And again, was featured in documentaries and books on that matter. So clearly an interesting career in the Navy. He retired as an 06, and then the next chapter began into his corporate career, where he worked for a lot of well-known companies that I'm sure you all have heard of, and then climbed the ladder through those, eventually finishing with his stint as the CEO of Sparton Corporation. And with a career like that, both the military service, the civilian service, I'm very confident that he's going to provide some valuable lessons for us today. So without further ado, let me ask Bill to reveal himself for us. And
hey, John.
And then we'll go ahead and get started. I've got some questions for him, but also understand that if you have questions, then we will try to entertain them as well. There is a Q&A block in there that you can submit your questions. So let me just start by saying, Bill, you joined the Navy right out of high school. Could you just tell folks what was your motivation to serve at that time?
Well, ever since the Apollo days, I wanted to be an astronaut, and so I did. I actually got nominated in 1987 as the first submariner to be nominated. Now we have a female submariner on the space station, and I feel pretty proud of that. I kind of feel like I was a spearhead of sorts. But and we also have another female submariner who's going to go to the moon. It's already been announced. So everything I did in those days was focused on the astronaut bit. In those days, you had to be a pilot to be an astronaut. And while I was at the academy, my vision went bad. I couldn't be a Navy pilot anymore. So I ended up going submarines. And then when the mission specialist position was created for space shuttle, I applied again and this time was nominated, but kind of was kicked out for my vision again. So most exciting and disappointing event of my professional career happened in very short sequence, but that's what the whole motivation was for me going to Annapolis and everything like that. I never expected to spend an entire career in the Navy. I'm class of 79. Hey, I'm that old. And our motto in class of 79 was out the door in 84. So it was going to be get out of the Navy and go do something else. I stayed in at first because of the potential to get selected as a mission specialist astronaut. And then when that fell through, I had already gone to graduate school. I needed to pay the Navy back for graduate school. And I ended up staying one more tour and then one more tour and then one more tour. And pretty soon, 26 years had gone by. And then I made the transition.
That sounds a little familiar. I could say my career was somewhat similar. I planned for 5, but then they just keep dangling those carrots out in front of you.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And again, I wouldn't change a thing. There's advantages to staying in the military for a career before you transition, but there are also distinct disadvantages. And so I got lucky in a bunch of ways, and but we could talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Now, 26 years in the Navy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then another, 15 years in the civilian world?
Correct. Yeah, in industry.
Isn't it time to be settling down? I mean, what motivated you to write your book?
The reason I wrote it, I actually didn't want to write a book. I mean, it's an incredible amount of work. It took me a year to write it, and then another year to get it published, if you can believe that. It's an arduous process. But I was a P&L leader from the beginning. I was profit and loss running a business unit, and then kept getting promoted to larger and larger. I ran multi-billion-dollar businesses for over a decade. And I would try to hire veterans every opportunity I could. But I kept finding, first of all, when I transitioned myself, nearly everything I was told by the Navy, in my case, during my transition course, it used to be called Transition Assistance Program, or TAP. I think it's called Skills Bridge. I'm not quite sure. But nearly everything I was told was wrong. And I learned all of these lessons the hard way. That it didn't occur to me that the people that were teaching the course really didn't know what they were talking about. When I became a hiring manager and I hired veterans, I saw that they were making the exact same mistakes that I was. And that's when I realized that the problems were structural. They were not one-off problems. They were the military, I won't say intentionally, but I will say repeatedly tells its transitioning veterans the wrong things. And, if we gave it 20 seconds of thought, we shouldn't be surprised by that. The people teaching these courses, they've never transitioned successfully. Otherwise, they wouldn't be teaching these courses. And I don't want to denigrate, but they're given bad information. And as a hiring manager, I hated having to say the same things over and over and over again to veterans that were applying for positions in my company. And so first thing I did was I tried looking for a book that told the truth. And there are a lot of books out there for transitioning military people, but none of them that I found took the perspective of a hiring manager. There's books written by recruiters from the recruiter's perspective that are actually very good. There's one book out there that's written by a flag officer who was handed his job, never had to fight for a thing. It's pretty useless, frankly. And I couldn't find the book that I was confident saying, here, read this and you'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I decided that the most efficient way to solve the problem is to write the book myself with all these lessons that I'd collected over the 15 years in industry.
Okay. Yeah. As I recall in the book, one of the things that you remarked on was you kept hearing that, hey, all the civilian world wants is your leadership and that'll take care of itself. But I guess you didn't find that to be true.
Absolutely not. Yeah, I call it the great lie, because, during these transition courses, the military, in its zeal to make veterans feel good about their service,
Mm-hmm.
they misrepresent what it's going to take to succeed. They try to make you feel like you've got everything you need to be successful. And the truth is, there's a lot that the military hasn't taught you that you're going to need to understand and learn to be successful in industry. And this business of all your future employer wants from you is good leadership. I remember hearing those words, and we all nodded, yeah, because hey, we're all good leaders. In my case, I served as a brigade level commander in the Navy, major commander, right? So you say, well, look, if all I need is good leadership, I've got that. My future is assured, isn't it? And the truth is no. In fact, if even in the military, that's not true. If it were, we could take a infantry brigade commander and make him commodore of a submarine squadron, and he'd do just fine.
Good point.
And but no, you actually need to know something about the organization you're in and what it takes to succeed in order to be successful. And leadership doesn't get you there. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a lot, you need a lot more than just good leadership.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned a moment ago that you hired many, many veterans, and I'm sure, just like you admit yourself, there are mistakes made. Was there anything in common? Because I get this question a lot, or what are the biggest mistakes that veterans make when they transition into their new roles?
Failing to adapt. I put in the book that leadership is hard, but it's even harder when you're leading people who can actually quit. And
Yep.
so, excuse me. So that's probably the biggest mistake, is people that have been very successful leaders in the military presume that that leadership success that they enjoyed in the military will translate to the civilian world, and it doesn't always. In fact, I don't want to pick on any particular service. You just did the survey, but there is some, in some cases, folks are trained what I would call lockstep leadership. This is how you lead. You do this, and then you do this, and it just, the real world doesn't work that way. And so what you need is, to adapt to the environment that you're in. Situational leadership is what you really need to be able to exhibit in order to succeed in industry. But there's a whole lot more.
Okay. Now, by the same token, I'm sure you had some of your new hires, whether they came out of the military or not, right? That just, maybe they blew you away. They got off to a great start.
Mhm.
What do you think it was that they brought to the table that you wished everybody you hired had?
The understanding that they may not know everything they need to know in order to succeed. If I were to describe one mistake that I saw happen to transitioning military people more than their never served counterparts, it was but inappropriate assumption that they had what it takes to succeed, rather than a humility to admit that I may need to learn a lot here before this is going to really work out for me. And in the book, I say, look, it doesn't matter if you were a brigadier general. When you transition industry, you're a second lieutenant all over again. You're starting out all over again. And you need to come to it with that attitude, with that frame of mind. If you don't, the chances are that you're going to stumble. And in fact, one of my first jobs when I joined industry, I was hired in at the director level, was to fire a one-star who worked for us. And the reason I needed to fire him was he did not adapt well. And he was using the same kind of techniques that made him successful in the Air Force to just not failing to understand that those methods may not be appropriate in industry. And his team was, to use the Navy expression, abandoning his ship. He was losing people, morale was plummeting. And so I was asked to, I didn't understand at first why they wanted me to do it. I later figured out it was a test for me. Would I do it? Right. Yeah. And so I did. But the point is that, you could be failing to adapt as a second lieutenant, failing to adapt as a one-star. I've had several 3-stars working for me and 1 4-star. But the point I'm making here is that the more likely, or the more somebody has been successful in their past life, the more they inappropriately presume that those prior successes will translate into success in their future life. And the problem is that their prior successes were enjoyed within a certain framework, with a certain talent base, a certain skill set, things like that. None of those factors will be true in the future job. And so the adaptability needs to be there. And in most cases, I would say that never served folks are less likely to presume that they've got what it takes.
Right.
Right. And again, the served folks actually have more tools at their disposal. They can tolerate the suck better. They've got more tools at their disposal, but there's also this mental attitude that needs to be, developed in order to succeed. That sometimes the folks come in with a little bit too much confidence. I think is the word I'm looking for. That confidence needs to be earned.
Right.
You don't start day one and being confident that you're going to hit it out of the park when you don't even know what it takes to succeed yet.
Right. Okay. Now, interestingly, a question just came up from Ben. He's somebody in our program that almost matches perfectly the next question I had in mind for you. And it's the fact that, well, when I look at your background, obviously you've got a stellar academic career, but you do not have an MBA, correct?
I do not.
Okay. Well, what are your thoughts then on the importance of getting one?
So MBA is kind of like a trendy thing. The importance of an MBA increases and decreases with time. I would say now most companies are not enamored with the MBA. It's unless you're going to go into mergers and acquisition, company valuation, or finance,
right,
then MBA is probably not going to serve you well. And the thing is about most of your employers and hiring managers are going to have just a single bachelor's degree. And so this is one of those things that it's hard to grasp, because in the military, we really value degrees, formal education, right? I talk in the book about this one resume I was asked to read and explain to my boss who was looking to hire this guy. And the resume indicated that the person had spent 20 years on active duty and almost 10 of those years in school. Okay. And so he had, he was an Air Force Academy graduate, got a technical degree from AFIT, which is fine. But then he had
my degree too. So yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. Then he had a War College master's degree, and then he got an MBA somewhere, I guess at night or something like that. And so the guy says, "What is this guy? A professional student?" Your employer would much more value 2 or 3 years of additional work experience over that MBA, because you do not need MBA level financial skills to succeed in industry. You need basic financial skills, absolutely. And every company kind of does their finances differently. And I did, I went to a Harvard Business School executive course for finance. And it was great to have that on my resume when my company was paying for it. I wasn't paying for it. But I will tell you that almost nothing I learned there was germane. And I was president of a company when I did this. Almost nothing I learned there was germane to my job. And the only reason I went was my board of directors wanted me they were grooming me for the CEO position. And so they said, this will look good on the resume. So I did it, and I was glad I did it, but to full MBA, no, I wouldn't recommend it unless you've got extra money.
Okay. All righty. Well, it's funny. I know you brought up the AFIT thing, and I went to AFIT 8 years after I'd already been in the Army. And it was me and 3 Army captains. And we were actually West Point classmates all together, all combat veterans of either, Desert Shield or Panama and all that. But most of our classmates were like second lieutenants out of the Air Force. And I'm not knocking the Air Force here, but it did seem to be just a little bit of a different culture of the importance that was placed on it. But yet in our role here at Alliance, we see exactly what you're talking about, is that generally speaking, the companies we partner with will say, we can teach you the things you need to know. If you go in with an open mind, a desire to learn and all that. But you've got some intangibles from the military that we can't possibly develop the way the military did. So it's reassuring to hear that.
Yeah. And, when I was told the great lie, which is all you need is good leadership, when I wrote the book, I tried to determine if I were to tell people one thing that they need, what would that be? And what I ended up characterizing it as is informed passion to learn. Right. So informed, you come out of the military with a certain, level of knowledge of your future employer wants to leverage that. As second, passion, it's a fire in the belly thing. Everybody wants to hire people with passion. But the third thing is to learn, informed passion to learn, because they know that you don't come to that job with knowing everything you need to know. And so they want evidence. And your resume needs to provide that evidence, not hand-waving statements, but facts, right? That demonstrate that you've had to learn how to do, your job kind of over and over again, because that's the exact situation you're going to find yourself in after you transition.
Okay, good. Now, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the decision-making process, when leaving the military and going into a new career, or even as you advance your career and you're given different options. You went into some detail in your book about the various options you had leaving the Navy. I think one of them was managing a horse track, right?
Yeah, right. President of a horse racetrack, yeah.
But I was really drawn to a diagram you had. In fact, let me pull that up on the screen here. Okay. I think you know where I'm going with this, but whoops.
By the way, thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Oh.
With all of that, it's a wonder I'm still alive.
Okay, so this is the diagram, and I think hopefully everybody can see it right now.
Yep.
And when somebody asks us for advice about this, I think we're in a similar vein. In fact, in the book, you said something to the effect, whenever anybody asked you for advice about moving into the civilian world, the first question you would ask them was, where do you want to live? And that was a trick question that you had for them. Could you explain
Absolutely.
that?
Yeah, because the only right answer is where the job is, right? So you're going to be faced with opportunities that involve the trade-off between location, compensation, and job type. The other question that people say is, what kind of job should I get for my first right out of the service? And the answer to that question is, where do you want to be in 10 to 15 years? And then you pick the job that has the most highest probability of getting you there. So that's the job type aspect of it. Compensation and location are also trade-offs. You're going to be lucky to get one of those 3 variables where you want it to be. If you get 2, you're really, really lucky. And the reason where do you want to live is a trick question is that needs to be the independent variable. You should not care. If you're really, really serious about your second career, you get the job type and compensation where you want it. You shouldn't care where it is, because that location will come later, right? What you want to do is set yourself up for the maximum opportunity for success. That's job type. Get the kind of compensation you want, and then location will follow. So if you're going to give up one of those three variables, it really ought to be location. In my personal example, the opportunity I ended up accepting was in Dallas, and I had never lived in Texas. I wasn't thrilled. They flew me down there to interview and all that, and I didn't love the terrain and flat and hot, and it turns out I loved it. I ended up loving living there and didn't want to leave when I got transferred in my civilian career, just like you get transferred in the military. I got transferred back to Northern Virginia, the last place I wanted to live. And so location is temporary, but if you get the right job and compensation, that's going to be really important. And that's what's going to assure your future success.
Okay. All right. Now, do you think things are changing in that regard? I mean, a lot of young people nowadays, they're hearing about the work at home, the hybrid work, that kind of thing. But just curious about your thoughts about that trend nowadays.
Well, as an employer, once you ran I had about 4,000 employees when I was at Hewlett Packard who worked at customer locations. And our job was running the Navy's IT framework. And so while I was at HP, the CEO said, we're an IT company. We shouldn't, HP at the time was a $100 billion a year company. And we owned 60 something buildings globally. And she couldn't understand why we had all this real estate. She basically thought we were a real estate company instead of an IT company. So she decided everybody would go home. Now, obviously that didn't work too well with my 4,000 employees who were required to be on military bases, right? So then that was problem number one is, okay, most of my employees can't work from home, but okay, I know how to follow orders. The ones who can work from home, will let them work from home. So we ran this experiment. Happily, we were an IT company. We can measure productivity, and productivity plummeted after we did this work from home experiment. And in fact, I remember we were on this meeting. The headquarters was in California, and my office was in Northern Virginia. And we're on a call with the headquarters folks in California, and I needed an answer from somebody. And she said, "Well, call them. We'll wait. Call them right now." So I hit the hold button, dial him, and then I could hear in the background he was in some shopping mall somewhere, right? And so he wasn't working from home. So that was kind of the end of the work from home experiment when we were at Hewlett Packard. Productivity declined. Mm-hmm. And people weren't doing what they said they were doing. There was a truth aspect, a trustworthiness aspect to it. Mm-hmm. Jump forward 10 years, I'm CEO of Sparton, and I'm running factories around the country, and COVID happens. And so, there's this whole work from home business. Let me tell you that the results were tragic from the productivity standpoint. And it created two classes of people, the haves and have-nots, right? The factory workers, the hourly workers, they can't work from home. Right. The ones that are trying to make a living, and so you've got the professionals. They can. Well, what's up with that, right? They're already making more money than I am, and you're letting them work from home, and so it became a real issue. And I finally terminated, when the COVID conditions were sufficient that, it wasn't such a risk anymore, I ended it. And so I think that the work from home, ethos isn't going to ever go away, but I do believe the pendulum is going to swing back, right, and in the not too distant future. And folks who insist on working from home may find themselves like looking for work. out of a job. And so I tell people, think really, really carefully about that. The other thing about it is that when you're working, when out of sight, out of mind, if you're working from home and people don't see you regularly,
Mhm.
don't expect those promotions. They're not going to happen. I mean, people, it's just a human nature that they deal with folks that they interface with on a regular basis. And the work from home folks are going to be, kind of afterthoughts. And so from a professional growth standpoint, you lose the ability to learn quickly, to accelerate your learning, because those daily interactions are really important for acceleration of learning. You lose the exposure that's going to get you promoted. People are going to say, boy, she's really good. You don't get that over the phone. I'm sorry, you just don't, or over Zoom. And so I do believe that it's going to swing back, and people should make peace with that.
Yeah. Okay. And in you saying that just triggered something that I also recall reading from your book. And correct me if I'm wrong, you don't golf, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't golf.
And sometimes people have this belief that deals happen on golf courses, promotions, things like that. But certainly that wasn't true for you, right? So how do you compensate for that, or do you even have to?
Well, you need to find other ways. Humans are social animals. And for those who are golfers, that's a reasonable way to interface in a way that's, outside of the work environment. I never wanted a pastime where I was more frustrated after I did it than I was before I started. And, I tried golfing and I sucked. And so why do I want to spend time getting better at something that doesn't move me forward? So, but there's other ways to do that. It is important that you figure out a way to engage socially with your coworkers. And, but really, I think in final analysis, it's your performance that's going to determine to the degree to which you're promoted and successful and things like that. I won't lie to you, there have been situations where in my opinion, somebody was given a kind of an easier bill because they were golfing buddies with the boss than I might have been, but those things do happen. But in my view, that you're working for the wrong company if those kind of things happen around you. And I think it happens less and less these days.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And that leads to also just discussions about relationship building. You mentioned your book. We talk about it a lot here at Alliance, the importance of that, especially for a new employee. Any recommendations for a new employee when it comes to building valuable relationships with their new organization?
Understand the culture. And what you may not, just like the different services have different cultures, different companies, and in fact, sometimes different divisions within the same company will have different cultures. One of the things that I was asked to do early in my tenure in industry, some companies have these things called employee resource groups, or ERGs, which are, might be the Asian Pacific ERG, or the Black Engineers ERG, or the, in my case, I was asked, and in many cases, companies will have what they call an executive sponsor. Is an executive whose job it is to interface between that employee resource group and the company. And so coming out of the Navy in 2006, still during the don't ask, don't tell time, there was concern that I didn't know, I wouldn't be able to relate to LGBTQ employees. So they said, Bill, we think you need to be an executive sponsor for the LGBTQ employee resource group at Raytheon. It was at Raytheon at the time. And would you be comfortable with that? And of course, the only right answer is yes. And so I did that, and boy, it was eye-opening for me. But because not a demographic I had interfaced with very much, at least knowingly interfaced very much while I was on active duty. But things like that can be very important. Jump in, with both feet. Just make sure that you're engaging as much as you possibly can, both from a work perspective. Take all the training courses you can. Pay attention to the culture. Do what they do. In my case, at Raytheon, the culture involved giving back to the community. My boss did Habitat for Humanity. I did a youth riding program for troubled youth and things like that. But to try to immerse yourself in all those things, and I think it helps you acclimate.
Okay. Now, if I could change topics just a little bit, performance evaluations. Military services are all different, but still pretty regimented and structured, and it's something that people get comfortable with how it works. And many of them are curious, okay, what's this going to be like once I join the civilian world? Am I going to get written evaluations every 6 months, every year? How does that work? How's that going to figure into my future? What kind of advice, given that you've seen probably different systems at your companies, what advice would you give to somebody who's maybe a little bit naive about that, first entering that work part of it?
Every company's different. They each have their own policy. The good companies will do at least one formal performance review a year. And in fact, many companies, that's what they base their bonus on, is your annual performance review. And then you have a range of bonuses, that where you fall within that range is determined by your annual performance review. But those best practices as well, though, is they'll give you periodic reviews in between that annual performance review to give you an opportunity to correct any deficiencies before the annual review actually happens. In the military, our OERs or fitness reports focus on kind of what the future might hold for you. In industry, the performance reviews are much more likely to focus on your shortcomings, so things that you need to fix. And so I know that in the Navy, back in the day, it's not like this anymore. Everybody walked on water, just some people walked a little higher than others. And I understand that's kind of been moderated some since I've left the Navy. But in industry, you can get what you might think is a pretty mediocre performance review, only to learn that, holy cow, everybody's is that way, right? They're going to focus on your shortcomings and the things you need to improve, not on how great you are. That's not the purpose. And so I joke that you need to develop thick skin when you go through the annual performance review process in industry. But if you take the feedback to heart and you work on ameliorating whatever issues that were brought up during the performance review, you got nothing to worry about. By the way, if there's any surprises in the performance review, you really need to ask yourself, was I listening? I mean, you shouldn't be hearing anything for the first time during the performance review. And maybe people were telling you these things over the previous few months and you just weren't hearing it. And they decided they needed to write it down because then you won't miss it, right? And so you're going to do some soul searching if you think that you're being surprised by that review.
Okay, thank you. Now, when you were the CEO of Sparton, it was a private equity owned firm, correct?
That's right.
And one of the things you mentioned that about it was that was very gratifying was that basically the board said, just act as if you're the owner of the company, right?
Right.
And you felt that to be very freeing. And I just, was hoping you could comment on that and how that allowed you to do your job and how that might also translate to a new employee just starting work for a company like that.
Yeah. So, of course, there's public and private companies. Public companies obviously sell, stock. The shareholders are the owners of the company. And because usually the executives are compensated based on share price, as is the board of directors, they really chase the quarterly returns because you give their quarterly reports to the street, to SEC and all of that, on how the company is doing. So they're really focused on short-term gains. And so that becomes a problem because the company then may forego investments, required investments, in order to get that quarterly return where the company said it was going to be, where the company said it was going to be. And the company gives estimates of where they think they're going to be at the end of the quarter. And if they don't hit that target, your share price is going to drop. So that affects, modulates a lot of the way the company behaves. Privately owned companies, in my case, it was owned by a private equity firm. They don't have that dynamic, right? Usually they're after long-term growth. And so what that does is it allows you to make decisions for the right reasons. I want to make an investment in manufacturing equipment or whatever, and my return on investment is going to be, let's say, 5 years. I can make those decisions for the right reasons, even if they have temporary negative short-term impacts on cash or profit, right? So that was point number one. And then the point you made is that when they said run the company as if you owned it, make decisions as if they're affecting you. Actually, they were, the way my compensation scheme was determined, they were affecting me. It was wonderfully liberating because then I didn't have to worry about the street. I didn't have to worry about SEC and reports and 5Ks and things like that. You could just make the right decisions for the right reasons. And so, but from the employee standpoint, that allows you to make hiring decisions, because, for example, one of the first things the CEO will do when the company is falling short on profit is freeze new hires. You see that all the time, right? Tesla, freezing new hires is going to cut 10% of the professional staff. Why? That rolls to the bottom line immediately, right? Now there's some severance payments and things like that you pay out. And in the way the accounting rules work, you have to accrue those severance payments the day you announce them. So a negative hit to profit the day you announce it, but over long term, it becomes accretive. So there's nuances to this, but I highly encourage people to look for jobs in private companies when they're available. If they're, again, but is it the right job? It's going to take you where you want to be 10 to 15 years down the road. And is the compensation level right? And those are the things that you need to think about.
Okay. I guess one last question I have for you here. In the military, many of us have seen it. I've seen it. Most of the folks I deal with on a daily basis. The nature of the military is just about every year you change jobs or billets, something with new and greater responsibility. And of course, in the civilian world, that tends to be a little bit different there. You might find yourself in a position for a much longer period of time. If you were mentoring like a new hard-charging employee that was maybe frustrated by the progression that they were making, any general advice you would give to them?
Well, the first thing I would say is in industry, you don't have to wait for your lineal number in the Navy, your seniority level to get to the point where you're allowed to be promoted and then Senate confirmation. In industry, I tell my transitioning senior officer friends, look, be careful when you talk to that 34-year-old because he can be your boss tomorrow. And that's not an exaggeration, right? Okay. So you have way more opportunity for rapid advancement in industry than you did in the military, period. I used to work for General Colin Powell, and he used to say that the military is the greatest meritocracy in the country. And I believed him until I joined industry. And then I realized, wait a minute, if that guy gets promoted before I do just because he's been in the Navy longer than me, that's not a meritocracy, that's a bureaucracy, right? And so the industry, you're not going to encounter that. It may be frustrating. In my case, I was very lucky. I got promoted very quickly. My first promotion to vice president, I was probably over 20,000 people who were senior to me in the company. I would say that the fact that, junior military officers are transitioning, there's both an opportunity and a concern. The opportunity is you're going to spend way more time in industry than I did, just based on your youth.
Right.
I'm 65 now. I'm of retirement age. And so and I had 15 good years in industry, but if I transitioned as an 03 instead of an 06, I could have 30 years in industry, right? And those 30 years give you plenty of runway to get really, really senior. The risk, though, is that for every one person that I saw transition as an 03 and do extremely well, I see 10 who 30 years later are on the same job that they got when they first transitioned out of the military. Because for whatever reason, they became complacent. They lost the fire in the belly. They didn't adapt well. They didn't learn the right skills. So you need to be aggressive. If you really want to, if your objective is to do very, very well in industry, you will have the opportunity to do that. But if you, and I don't want to say get lazy, but that's really what I mean. If you get lazy or, there's opportunity to stagnate as well. And so you need to balance those things and keep that fire in the belly.
All right. Thanks for that. Well, before we close out, I know I pulled a lot out of you from things I gathered from the book. You've got a group of folks here, when I looked at, mostly junior officers who, when I looked at the survey, majority of them are getting out in the next year. Some of them have gotten out recently. So if you have any parting words of advice to somebody in that shoes, like if you were in their position right now, I'd just like to open the floor to you to offer anything up that you think would be useful to them.
Let's see. I'm looking at some of the questions here too. I think in the time we have left, maybe I can't get to these questions, but the parting words of advice I would give is, the world is your oyster. I mean, I hate to use a kind of a metaphor like that, but there's plenty of opportunity in industry. If you think that your time in the military is done, right, that you don't think you want to continue in the military, there's an enormous amount of opportunity for you in industry. As long as you get the right job and job is a good fit. One of the factoids that I hate is that there's a statistic that transitioning veterans on average spend less than a year in their first job before they change companies, change jobs.
We see that, yeah.
And then that's a tragedy. That's travesty. It's because they took a position that wasn't a right fit, and either they didn't know it or their company didn't know it. And so make sure that you understand what it is you're getting yourself into and go in with the right attitude, because every time you change companies and change jobs, you're starting all over again. And so you hit that reset button. Now you can get away with, if you're young, if you're a junior military officer, you might get away with that a couple of times. But then people are going to say, why does that person keep changing jobs every 18 months, right? Well, something must be wrong with her. And so you've got to make sure that you go into it with the mindset that you're going to make this work. You're going to be there at least for 5 years. Take that point of view, because if you let yourself believe, you can walk away at any time. And it's almost like a marriage, right? If you let yourself believe that, I don't have to work to make this work out, then I guarantee it'll come true, right? And so you'll fail. So really go in with the understanding that you're going to need to work, you're going to need to be adaptable, and you're in it for the long haul. That's my recommendation.
Yeah. And that is certainly great advice. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier about where do I want to be in 10 years? I told you how my career path was one where I just kept chasing one good deal after another in the Army. But yet I never, even as an infantry guy, most infantry guys eventually want to command a battalion or a brigade, just like in the Navy and the submarines, you want to command your own ship. And I guess maybe that wasn't necessarily my personal goal to do that. And I never really made a decision, for the long term. I've no regrets either. Things worked out okay for me, but I just, I often think about, if it had gone differently, if I had thought a little bit more long term instead of just, again, chasing those little things. Okay, well, I want to make sure we keep this to an hour. There's one or two other things I want to make sure that we do here today. First off, thanks for everybody for attending. And by the way, there's going to be a way to win a free book here. That's why I want you to hold on to the very end here. I did want to make sure you all knew that. I don't want to make this to be a plug about Alliance. A lot of the folks here are already part of our program and know what we offer. If you're part of this webinar and you don't know anything at all about Alliance, please check us out. You can see our website down there. Our model is we select really high-performing candidates. We evaluate every candidate coming into our program. They get selected by our CEO. We put them through a transition program, a lot of classes, so that they can make good fit choices, like you heard Bill say here. That's the most important thing. You go for fit. We invest a lot of time in our classes to talk about career fields, to learn about the corporate world, do Harvard Business Review case studies and all that, and then put them in front of vetted opportunities of companies that aren't just looking to fill a position. They're looking for folks that have got big goals. And so if you have any interest in learning more about us, go to our website, fill out a query, and we'll be glad to have a conversation with you. Last thing I'll say is Bill was very gracious in saying that he would be willing to offer up some audio versions of his book. I think he's got 5 of them that he can give away. And here's what we've decided to do. Here's his email address. And shoot him an email. Tell him you're interested in the book. And I think he's going to take the first 5 that he gets and send you a link to be able to do that. So, Bill, thanks again for doing that. Thanks for your time today. What you all don't know is he just got back from a big trip. He's a little bit under the weather. He did a webinar earlier today. He did this one for us. So clearly an individual who's interested in you all and giving back to the community. And I, for one, on behalf of everybody here, thank you for that. Thank you for your service and for your words of wisdom today, Bill.
Thanks, John. If anybody has a question, email me at that same email address, and I'll try to answer some of these great questions that came in via the message system while we're doing this. Happy
I appreciate that. I did not get to them all, but if you have any, that's great to hear. Well, Bill, thanks. Thanks, everybody, for attending, and have a great day.